Some dives don't just take lives, they take whole families. In this video, we're sharing 5 true stories where underwater caves didn't just claim one person, but tore entire families apart. Fathers and sons, brothers and sisters, young couples. Some of them died side by side. One died on Christmas Day, another on their birthday. These aren't just accidents, they're heartbreaks that echo long after the water goes still. So we're warning you now. Viewer discretion is advised. These are real tragedies, and they're hard to forget. We'll take you from Florida to Australia, from the deepest sinkholes to caves that still hold their secrets. Each story builds. Each one hits harder than the last. So stay with us until the end, because this isn't just about diving. It's about how one decision, one descent, can destroy a family forever. A holiday that should have been home. It was Christmas morning. Most families were opening presents, sipping coffee, waiting for dinner. That's what Darren Spivey's fiancée was doing. She was expecting him and his 15-year-old son, Dylan, to come back soon. They were supposed to have Christmas together. But Darren had other plans. He and Dylan drove out to Eagle's Nest Sink, a deep, dangerous cave system hidden in the woods of Florida. It's beautiful on the surface, calm and clear like a natural spring. But underneath, it's a maze. Known in the diving world as the Mount Everest of cave diving, neither of them were properly trained for this kind of dive. Darren had open water certification, enough to dive in lakes, reefs, or shallow springs, but not caves. Dylan wasn't certified at all. He was just a teenager. Still, they suited up. Tanks, fins, lights, and on Christmas morning, they slipped into the water and vanished into the dark. Hours passed. When they didn't come back, Darren's fiancée started to worry. She called authorities. Rescue divers arrived, knowing what they were probably walking into, another recovery mission, not a rescue. And they were right. What was meant to be a family holiday turned into something else entirely, a silent dive into one of Florida's most dangerous underwater traps. Darren Spivey was 35. He loved diving, loved the water, but he didn't have the training for what Eagle's Nest required. No cave diving certification, no redundant gear, no safety guideline. Still, he brought his son with him. Dylan Sanchez was only 15, a teenager, no formal dive experience, no training in overhead environments, no way to handle a crisis in a cave 100 feet below the surface. But like most kids, he trusted his dad. They didn't use a guideline, the one tool that could have led them back out. They didn't carry backup tanks. They didn't even tell many people they were going in. To the experienced cave diving community, this was unthinkable. Eagle's Nest is not for amateurs. It's narrow, deep, and filled with silt. Once you lose your way in there, you don't get it back. Darren might have thought it would be fine. Just a quick dive, a special moment with his son on Christmas. But caves don't care about intentions. They don't make exceptions for family. That single decision on to descend wasn't just a risk. It was the beginning of the end for both of them. The dive that never ended. They entered the water around noon. There were no guides, no instructors. Just Darren and Dylan, a father and son, disappearing into one of the most dangerous cave systems in North America. The surface of Eagle's Nest is calm, almost peaceful. But once you drop below, it turns into a maze. Narrow tunnels, silt-filled chambers, and drop-offs that plunge past 300 feet. They had no guideline. That alone was a fatal decision. Cave divers use guidelines as lifelines. A simple cord stretched from the entrance that leads you back out when visibility drops to 0, which it always does. Without one, you're guessing in the dark. Nobody knows how far they plan to go. Maybe they just wanted a quick look. Maybe Darren was trying to impress his son. But caves are unpredictable. One wrong turn, one fin kicking up silt, and your sense of direction is gone. When they didn't return home that afternoon, Darren's fiancée knew something was wrong. She called authorities immediately. Rescue divers arrived that evening. They found Dylan's body first, and just 67 feet down. He may have tried to turn back. Darren's body was deeper at 127 feet. Maybe he was still trying to find a way out, but time was gone. Air was gone. And so were they. Aftermath and blame. News of the tragedy spread fast. A father and son gone on Christmas Day. But sympathy wasn't the only reaction. The dive community mourned, but they were also angry. Because this wasn't just a tragic accident. It was preventable. Eagle's Nest Sink is infamous. It's clearly marked with signs, cave diving is extremely dangerous. Only trained, certified divers may enter. Locals call it the Mount Everest of cave diving for a reason. It has killed experienced divers. And Darren wasn't even cave certified. Many couldn't believe he took his son there. Dylan didn't have the knowledge to judge the risk. He followed his father, trusted him, and that trust led him into a place with no exit. This wasn't a mistake, one diver said. This was a decision, and it cost them both their lives. The story became a case study in diving forums and safety classes, not just about what went wrong, but why it went wrong. And for the family left behind, for the fiancé who waited at home, for the relatives who expected to see them at dinner, Christmas will never be the same. They weren't just lost to the water, they were lost to one choice, made together. Ginny Springs Nightmare. Victims, unnamed father and teenage son. At Ginny Springs, there's a sign at the cave entrance that's impossible to miss. It's red, bold, and terrifying. It shows a skull, the Grim Reaper, and the words, "Stop, prevent your death, go no farther." It's not decoration, it's not a joke, it's a last chance to turn around. But sometime in the 1990s, a man brought his teenage son past that sign. They weren't cave certified. They didn't have proper gear, no backup tanks, no redundant lights, and worst of all, no guideline. They passed through the warning gate and went straight into one of Florida's most dangerous underwater mazes. This wasn't open water, it wasn't a reef, it was a cave. And once you go too far inside, there's no sunlight to follow back. The father led the way, the son followed, and after that, no one saw them alive again. The cave gave its final warning. They chose to ignore it. The last dive together. What happened next is every diver's nightmare. They descended into the tunnel past the restriction. It starts wide, almost welcoming, but deeper in, it tightens. The floor is covered in fine silt, and one wrong kick sends it floating into the water like smoke. Without a guideline, all it takes is a few clouds of silt, and you're blind. That's likely what happened. The father and son lost visibility, lost direction, lost the exit. Rescue divers later found their bodies close together, tangled in debris. Their air tanks were empty. Their lights had gone out. They had clearly tried to turn back, but couldn't find the way. This wasn't a violent death. It was slow. A terrifying realization that you're trapped. And there's nothing you can do. One can only imagine what the son felt, following his dad into a place he trusted was safe, only to die alongside him. That tunnel doesn't forgive mistakes, and it gave them no second chance. Death in silence, grief and rage. When word got out, the dive community reacted immediately and emotionally. It wasn't just another cave diving accident, it was something worse. A father brought his child into a place made for trained adults and paid for it with both their lives. People were furious. Why ignore the warning sign? Why take a teenager beyond a marked danger zone? Why bring someone you love into an environment they weren't trained to survive? The tragedy hit hard because it wasn't just about loss. It was about responsibility, about the kind of decisions that can't be undone. Ginny Springs had already seen deaths before, but this one stuck. It wasn't an equipment failure. It wasn't a freak accident. It was a choice, and it cost a family everything. This was a failure of judgment, one instructor said. Not skill, not gear, judgment. The story was used in training classes after that, not just to scare students, but to make them understand one simple truth. Caves aren't for guessing, and when you lead someone in, you're responsible for bringing them out. One wrong step, a family gone. We don't know their names. Out of respect, the details of this father and son were never released to the public. There are no photos, no gravestones on display, just a story, passed down in the dive community like a quiet warning. And yet, even without names, the lesson is unforgettable. You don't need to be reckless to die in a cave. You just need to ignore one warning, take one step too far, or trust someone who didn't know what they were doing. The father likely didn't mean harm. Maybe he thought they'd stay close to the entrance. Maybe he thought they'd be fine. But that's the problem. Caves don't care what you meant. The son followed, as kids do. He didn't question, he trusted, and that trust was the last thing he ever gave. The bodies were recovered, but something else was lost. A bond, a future, a family. Even today, Ginny Springs has the sign up. The same Grim Reaper, the same message. People walk past it, take pictures, laugh, but for some it's not just a sign, it's a gravestone. Provo Cave Tragedy, Utah, 2005. Victims: 4 friends, J. Blake Donner, 24, Jennifer Lynn Galbraith, 21, Scott McDonald, 28, Ariel Singer, 18. Cave of Death was just a joke, until it wasn't. They weren't strangers to the cave. That's the part that stings most. The 4 friends had explored the Provo Cave before, a small, tucked-away opening on Y Mountain in Utah. To locals, it was just a curiosity, a place to visit, take photos, maybe crawl a little. Some called it the Cave of Death, but only as a joke, just a nickname. No one really took it seriously. But in August 2005, that nickname became a prophecy. The cave was small and mostly dry, but near the back, it dipped underwater. There was a short, submerged tunnel connecting 2 air chambers, a tight, narrow passage only wide enough for one person at a time. No markings, no safety gear, no visibility, and no room for error. J. Blake Donner was the oldest of the group, 24, bright, adventurous, and respected. His girlfriend, Jennifer Galbraith, was 21, smart, driven, and always up for something new. Scott McDonald, 28, and his girlfriend, Ariel Singer, just 18, rounded out the group. That day, they didn't tell many people where they were going. They didn't have wetsuits or tanks, just swimsuits and flashlights, a plan to explore. a little thrill-seeking, nothing serious. But once inside, they pushed deeper. And when they reached the submerged tunnel, they decided to go through it. To reach the second chamber, there were no guidelines, no air backup. The tunnel was less than 15 feet long, but twisted and black. And once you entered, the exit behind you vanished instantly. It's unclear who went first. What's known is that none of them came back. They tried to hold their breath and swim through. Maybe one got stuck. Maybe the others went after them. Maybe panic took hold in that black space and the tunnel became a trap no one could escape. By the next day, all 4 were gone, sealed in darkness. The Cave of Death joke wasn't funny anymore, it was real. Young love, frozen in time. They were all so young. Jennifer and Ariel were still in college. Blake had just graduated. Scott was trying to find his place in the world. They weren't careless, just confident. Like most people in their 20s, they felt strong, capable, invincible. But caves don't care how old you are, or how in love you are, or what plans you had for next week. That short tunnel, barely long enough for a pause, turned into a tomb. We'll never know exactly what happened in those last moments. The bodies were found close together inside the submerged tunnel. No tanks, no diving masks, just the clothes they wore in. The best guess? One person hesitated, got caught halfway through. Another went in to help, then another, then another. By the time they realized there was no exit, their breath was already running out. Imagine holding your breath, crawling through cold black water in a tunnel, barely wider than your shoulders. There's no light, no air pockets. You feel ahead with your hands. If the person in front of you stalls, even for 10 seconds, it's over. There's no swimming backward, no turning around, just silence. Blake and Jennifer had only recently started dating. Scott and Ariel had plans together, maybe a future. They went into the cave laughing, probably joking like everyone else who'd explored it before. But they never made it out. Their parents were stunned. These weren't reckless kids. These were honor students, dreamers, good people. And in a few minutes, everything they were froze in the cold silence of that tunnel. A moment meant to be just a story to tell became the final chapter of their lives. Families shattered overnight. When the 4 didn't return home, panic set in fast. None of them were the type to disappear without a word. Their parents started calling. Friends started texting. Hours passed, then the police were called. It didn't take long for someone to point toward Provo Cave. Search teams arrived that night. It was already dark outside. The cave was silent, untouched. Rescue divers prepared to enter, knowing deep down this wouldn't be a rescue. The tunnel that trapped the 4 friends was cruelly tight. The divers had to wiggle through feet first with just one light and one shot. It was the kind of space where even trained responders risk panic. And then they found them. 4 young bodies in the blackness, all together, frozen in place. News spread quickly, not just across Utah but across the country. This wasn't a scuba accident. This wasn't an ocean dive. This was a group of friends who thought they were just exploring and ended up drowning in a hole in the side of a mountain. Vigils were held on campus. Photos surfaced, smiling faces, handwritten poems, flowers left by classmates who couldn't process what had happened. Parents gave interviews, tears in their voices. They were just curious, one said. That's all. Curiosity doesn't sound like a crime, but in a cave it can be fatal. What devastated the families most wasn't just the loss, it was how preventable it all was. If the tunnel had a sign, if the cave had been sealed, if they had gone with someone trained. Instead, 4 lives ended in the space of a single breath, and 4 families were left staring at an empty dinner table, forever changed. A concrete tomb, sealed with grief. After the funerals, something had to change. Local authorities, what with pressure from families and the public, decided to close the cave permanently. They brought in concrete trucks and sealed the entrance shut. No more access, no more chances, no more death. What was once a dare turned into a memorial. Provo Cave, now known only through headlines and old maps, became a place no one could visit again. Some argued it should have been sealed long before. There had been incidents in the past, minor injuries, near drownings, but nothing like this. Nothing that took 4 lives in a single moment. Now, people stopped treating it like a joke. The Cave of Death nickname wasn't funny anymore, it was tragic. It was final. The families stayed in touch. They wrote to each other, spoke at safety seminars, and quietly grieved through the years. Each story they told was the same, about a child full of promise, a moment of curiosity, and the cave that took it all away. In dive safety courses, the Provo Cave tragedy is often mentioned, not to scare, but to respect. Respect the limits, respect the signs, respect the places that don't give second chances. Blake, Jennifer, Scott, and Ariel weren't thrill seekers. They weren't trying to break records. They were just looking for something different to do on a summer afternoon. Now, their story is a warning, and a memorial carved not in stone, but in silence. The cave they entered is gone, but the families they left behind still feel the weight of what happened inside. And for anyone who hears their story, one message is clear. Some places aren't meant to be explored. Not like that. Not unprepared. Not at all. The shaft disaster. The dive that drew 9. It started like a weekend adventure. 9 divers arrived at the shaft, a freshwater sinkhole outside Mount Gambier in South Australia. From the surface, the water looked crystal clear. The sun was out. Visibility was perfect. You could see nearly 200 feet down. It was beautiful, inviting, peaceful. But below that still water was a cave system with a deadly reputation. The shaft dropped steeply before branching into pitch-black tunnels and chambers. At the time in 1973, very few safety protocols existed for recreational cave diving in Australia. Equipment was limited. Training was minimal. Guidelines, if used at all, that were basic and often improvised. Still, these 9 divers suited up. Most were young. Most had little or no cave-specific training. Among them were Stephen and Christine Millot, a brother and sister who were excited to dive together. They didn't know what waited below. As the group descended into the deeper sections, the dive slowly unraveled. The layout was confusing. Passages that looked open led to dead ends. Silt was easily stirred, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Divers began to lose their orientation and each other. 4 of the 9 never made it back to the surface. Stephen, Christine, Gordon Roberts, John Bockerman. It would take months before all their bodies were recovered, and years before the full weight of that day truly sank in. A brother and sister lost together. Stephen and Christine Millot weren't just siblings, they were close friends. Adventurous, optimistic, and full of energy. They often went exploring together, and diving was something they shared. But this time, it wasn't a shallow reef or a calm beach. This was the shaft, a vertical plunge into a cave that no one had fully mapped and few understood. The dive started well enough. The water was clear. Visibility was excellent. But that was part of the problem. The shaft's clarity hides just how dangerous it is. Everything looks closer than it really is. Tunnels appear wide but narrow suddenly. Time disappears faster than you realize. Somewhere during the dive, Stephen and Christine became separated from the safer path. Maybe they took a wrong turn. Maybe they stayed just a little too long. Maybe they thought the exit was around the next bend. They were both found later in different parts of the cave system. Out of air, no signs of panic, just silence. There was no violent struggle, no obvious mistake. Just 2 people who trusted each other and trusted the dive. A little too much. For the Millot family, it was a double tragedy, losing not just 1 child, but 2. Not just a son or a daughter, but both. And for the rest of the group who survived, the guilt ran deep. How did 4 walk away while 4 never saw the surface again? Long wait, longer grief. Recovering the bodies wasn't simple. The shaft may be beautiful, but it is unforgiving. Its depth and tight chambers make recovery extremely dangerous, even for trained divers. It took months for authorities to safely bring everyone home. In some areas, silt was so thick it erased entire sections of the cave. Divers had to navigate by feel, inch by inch in total blackness. Each attempt risked more lives, but families were desperate for closure. The bodies were recovered one by one. Stephen, Christine, John, Gordon. The last body wasn't pulled out until a full year later. For the Millot family, every delay was agony. There were no final goodbyes, no immediate answers, just waiting, hoping, dreading. In the months that followed, Australia watched closely. This wasn't just a private loss anymore, it became national news. Not just because 4 young people had died, but because no one seemed to know how to stop it from happening again. At the time, cave diving had no formal safety standards, no required training, no certifications. If you had gear and confidence, you could go. That started to change after this disaster, but for the families who had to bury their children months, even a year after the dive, that change came too late. Out of tragedy came change. The deaths at the shaft didn't fade quietly, they lit a fire. The diving community and the Australian public demanded reform. Within a year, the Cave Divers Association of Australia, EAA, was formed. Its goal was simple but urgent: to prevent this from ever happening again. They created training programs. They established safety standards. They began certifying divers specifically for caves, something that had never existed before. Today, Australia is one of the strictest countries in the world when it comes to cave diving protocols. That all started because of Stephen and Christine, because of what was lost. Instructors now tell their story to new divers, not to scare them, but to ground them, to remind them what's at stake when you go into a cave with no line, no training, and no way back. For the Millot family, the loss never healed, but their children's names became more than names on a memorial. They became a reason for change, a reason people dive smarter, a reason that today someone else's brother or sister might still come home. The Devil's Throat. Victims: Siana Lutskanova and Evstati Jovchev. Diving partners, close companions. Into the unknown, and gone. In the Rhodope Mountains of southern Bulgaria, there's a cave carved straight into legend. Dark, echoing, and drenched in local superstition. They call it the Devil's Throat. Locals say it roars like a beast when water rushes through its tunnels. Others say it leads to the underworld itself, that nothing which enters it ever returns. To two young Bulgarian cave divers in 1970, the legends were just that, stories. Siana Lutskanova and Evstady Zhovchev were part of a small team aiming to push the limits of underwater exploration in Eastern Europe. These weren't thrill seekers or amateurs. They were educated, cautious, and well-equipped by the standards of their time. They had already made dives through sumps and flooded passageways in other caves across Bulgaria. Devil's Throat was meant to be another success, a dive to map the hidden sump beneath the roaring waterfall deep inside the cave's belly. On that day, the water level was strong, but manageable. Visibility wasn't ideal, but it rarely was in those days. The cave's lower system held a siphon, a flooded tunnel through which the underground river vanished, never returning to the surface inside the cave. Siana and Evstady prepared to enter the sump. They'd laid plans for a short penetration dive, with lights, tanks, and a rough line of communication to the surface team. They entered the water. Minutes passed. Then more. Then nothing. No bubbles. No sign. No return. The team above waited, then began shouting, then panicked. Rescue divers were called in within hours, but the cave gave back nothing. To this day, neither of them has ever been found. Vanished without a trace. Most cave diving deaths leave something behind, even if it's just a broken fin, a light, or a dropped slate. A trail, a clue, something. But in the Devil's Throat case, there was nothing. Rescue divers searched for days. They descended into the same flooded passage, using safety lines and following the current. They pushed farther than the original pair, risking their own lives to find the bodies. But the tunnels were brutal. The water surged unpredictably. The current that carried the underground river through the sump was fast, stronger than it seemed from the surface. The team feared Siana and Evstady may have been pulled into a submerged fissure or chute, perhaps deeper than any human had reached. The silt was thick. The walls were sharp. Visibility was nearly zero past 10 meters. Even sonar and probes couldn't trace anything. The cave system below the sump was too twisted, too violent. There were pockets where water funneled into vertical shafts, never returning. One diver described it as feeling like the cave swallowed water like lungs, but never exhaled. Rumors spread fast. Some locals said the couple had been taken by the cave, never meant to return. Others believed the river inside Devil's Throat feeds into an unknown network. Maybe it flows out in Greece, maybe even miles downstream. But scientists never found confirmation. The last recorded moment of Siana and Evstady's dive was the moment they slipped beneath the black water. After that, they were simply gone. No gear, no bodies, no bubbles. It became one of the only cave diving incidents in Eastern Europe where nothing was recovered, not even a hint, just silence. A family that faded quietly. When the official search ended, it wasn't just the cave that went quiet, so did the families. Siana and Evstady weren't just teammates. Many believed they were more, possibly a couple or close companions at the very least. Their connection was never made public, but those close to them knew how deeply they trusted each other. Losing one person is a tragedy. Losing two, bound together, is something else entirely. The government at the time released only sparse information. The incident was labeled a technical failure and closed off from the media. No photos were published, no formal memorials were allowed inside the cave, which remained open for research but was restricted heavily after the dive. Siana's parents never spoke to the press. Neither did Evstady's. Their names for years faded from public record. Only in recent decades, through private archives and local diving circles, has their story re-emerged. It's a strange kind of grief that when there's no body, no funeral, no certainty, their loved ones had to bury empty caskets. They lit candles for people who may have died instantly, or who may have survived longer, trapped somewhere in the dark. In small towns, stories linger. Some locals still remember the sound of helicopters over the forest that week. Others recall the divers setting up camp by the gorge. But most remember the silence afterward, and how quickly the government moved to quiet it all down. It wasn't just a loss, it was an erasure. The tragedy didn't make international headlines. No documentaries were made. For decades, Siana and Evstady became whispers in the cave diving world, but to their families, the pain never went quiet. It just went underground, like the water that swallowed them whole. The cave that swallowed them whole. Today, Devil's Throat is a tourist site. Visitors can walk across bridges, peer into the roaring mouth of the gorge, and hear legends from local guides. They talk about the noise, the cold air, the bats. But very few mention the divers, because what happened below still scares people. The sump where Siana and Evstady vanished remains closed, not for repairs, but for fear. No diver has successfully mapped the full route of the river since. Some believe the passage narrows to nothing. Others think it opens into an unreachable chamber buried under thousands of tons of rock. Either way, it hasn't let go of what it took. To many locals, the cave has its own will. They say it accepts some and rejects others, that the underground river is a one-way path, that if you go too deep, it keeps you. Tourists toss coins into the waterfall. They make wishes. But divers, the real ones, they know better. They stand at the edge and feel the air shift, the water pull. You don't challenge Devil's Throat, one guide says. You ask permission, and if you don't get it, you don't go. For Siana and Evsteti, that permission never came. Their names are now etched into Bulgarian diving history, not because they found something new, but because they vanished without a trace trying. They remind every diver that some caves have no exit, that beneath beauty lies something ancient, unfeeling, and final. They were brave. They were curious. They were in love with discovery. But Devil's Throat doesn't give things back. Not time, not truth, not even people. And some families never get the chance to say goodbye because the cave already did. The dive that killed a family. When we talk about cave diving tragedies, we're not just talking about risk. We're talking about families, fathers and sons, brothers and sisters, lovers, best friends, people who trusted each other enough to go into the dark together and never came back. These weren't just individual losses, they were chain reactions. When one diver doesn't return, a whole family breaks. A mother loses her son, a daughter grows up without a father, a table at home stays empty year after year. Some of these stories happened on holidays, some happened quietly without headlines, but every one of them left behind people who are still grieving, even now. So let me ask you something. Would you take your family cave diving? Would you bring your child past a warning sign? Would you follow someone you love into a place that even professionals fear? It's not an easy question, but it's one worth thinking about, because every diver in this video made a choice, and some of those choices turned into tragedies. They didn't plan for things to go wrong, they just didn't plan enough for when they did. If this episode moved you, tell us your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced danger with someone you care about? What would you have done differently? And more importantly, please take a moment to pray, or just reflect, for the families who never got closure, for the parents who had to bury their children, for the siblings who will always feel incomplete, for the loved ones who still leave a light on, hoping. Their pain didn't end with the dive. If you want more stories like this, real, human, and told with honesty, please subscribe to the channel. We don't sensationalize, we remember, and sometimes remembrance is the most powerful thing we can do. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and never take the next breath for granted.